Next, you got to get on a schedule. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense to people, but you have to get on a government-wide contract, to provide a service. You got to list your services, what you can and can't do. And then last but not least, bid your heart out. You got to respond to every RFP you can. You got to write proposals. You got to crank them out. You got to submit them. And eventually you're going to get a bite. There's contractors that do it for 5 or 10 years and don't really get a hit. But, there's advantages to being a small business, to being a minority-owned business. And the government has set aside contracts to make sure that they are giving out contracts in a fair and equal manner. All right, so let's talk about some of those pesky regulations. The Federal Acquisition Regulation, as you can see here, I got it in italics because I took the definition straight from the document. It seemed to be the most comprehensive, but it is the list of rules and regulations that you must comply by to do business with the federal government. It lays out how you can spend the money, how you must bid on the contracts, who you can hire, who you can hire, where you can do business, where you can't do business. Everything under the sun that someone has potentially broken a rule or thought about a rule, they put it in that document. The last I checked, the document was like 400 pages. It's broken down into sections. It's very contract-like. It's very meticulous, and it's written in a way that's, it's like lawyers wrote it. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's short sentences, and it's very clear. The next set of rules is the DFAR. So obviously, defense contracting, you guys hear about it all the time, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. They have a more complex set of rules. There's more going on. There's more non-compete issues. They want to keep things in-house, if you will. So there's a subsect of rules, probably another 100, 200 pages that have to do just with the defense agencies and the administration. Another thing I did wanted to bring up, because our company does have an accounting and financial flair, is, the cost accounting standard. They're the 19 standards that every company has to have within their accounting system to make sure that they are measuring and allocating the cost of each contract. There'd be no way to easily audit every contractor if they weren't using and tracking the money in the same manner. And it's not very different from how commercial companies do their accounting. It's just more meticulous. There's more steps in the process, and you have to make sure that you hold on to your records for a little bit longer. So I just wanted to go over some of the ins and outs real quick. I didn't want to take too much time on this, but I felt like, there's a couple good points here, and then, there's always a good jokes when talking about some of the stuff that the government allows and doesn't allow. So one thing that I find that most people don't know about government contracting is that you have to be on a schedule. There's different schedules. The GSA 70 is the most known government contracting schedule. What does that mean is that you get signed up, you purchase to be on the schedule. So that's a big thing. You got to understand that every step of this way costs a little bit of money. So it costs in the end, it costs all about 10 grand to get on the GSA 70 schedule. And that puts you on the list of contractors that the government can purchase items and products and supply. Anything, like I said, from catering to pencils to phones to widgets, water bottles, anything you can think of, if you want to sell it to the government, you got to be on the list. And that allows you to answer RFPs, a request for a proposal. A lot of you have proposal-based businesses, so you understand that you have to read through the proposal and you have to respond in kind. That means you have to explain how you're going to provide the service, who's going to provide the service, at what cost are you going to provide this service, and how efficiently can you do it. This is a tricky part. I only have one bullet point here because it was either have like 4 slides on it or just kind of talk about it. Each proposal requests different things. They require you to, have certain accounting standards, to be in a physical location, to have a certain amount of employees, to have employees of a certain education level. I once worked for a company that was responding to a thing where if any employee got a DUI at any point in time, the government could automatically terminate that contract. It didn't matter anything about it. There was one about seatbelts. If an employee got a seatbelt violation, they were automatically off the contract. There was nothing you could do about it. And each RFP is a little bit different. You have to make sure that you're really responding to all the questions, to all the answers, and you don't get a lot of time to ask a lot of questions. Once the government puts it out, there is a time for question and answering, but you better make sure that your questions are answered and so that you give the government what they want. you got to remember there's going to be a team of individuals who actually read through your entire proposal and make a good decision based upon mostly price, but also who you are and where you're located and who are some of your subcontractors. You know, a lot of times getting into government contracting is easier as a sub versus a prime. A prime contractor is going to be some of the larger companies that go after some of the larger contracts, i.e., let's call it, if you're going to build a plane, right? So Boeing builds a lot of planes, but Boeing doesn't build each component of the plane. They'll subcontract out all the computers, all the engines, all the brakes, all the tires, all the wings, all the seats, all the seat belts, all the lights, all the switches. All that's pretty much subcontracted out. And at the end, they'll put it all together, but Boeing can't feasibly make every single widget. They're not an expert in one computer system. They're not an expert in how engines turn. Now, while they do make some engines, you know, they contract that out. So you got to make sure, you know, that once you're a subcontractor for a good amount of time and you have an understanding of how the process works and you've built the relationships to make sure you can ask these questions, that you become a prime contractor. Kind of like what I said earlier, the government has a lot of contracts set aside for hub zone, minority owned, veteran owned, small businesses, because government contracting can get, you know, competitive when it comes to price. Obviously, again, like Boeing, a large company can do a job for cheaper. They have more people on staff, they have less, you know, they have more overhead, but it's already being factored into other contracts that they're doing. Whereas a small company, you may be 2 or 3 people and you're doing an IT service contract, and maybe someone's really good at writing software. Maybe they're really good at managing a software program. Well, you only need 2 to 3 people to do that. You can 1099 the rest of the work out. But how do you make sure that you get on some of those contracts? You got to take advantage of some of the, you know, some of the set-aside awards that the government has. I always like to bring up some rules when with government contracting. Some are obscure, some are funny, and some just, you know, they just confuse people. So first and foremost, I picked these off a website that I found, but I found them pretty clever. So one that scares people is that the government can terminate the contract at its convenience. Most of you know you're in a business where you have to sign a contract with a client. It can't, you know, you need 30 days, you got to pay the rest of the contract, there's stipulations. Not with the government. This rarely happens, but, you know, in a case where the government needs to separate itself from, you know, some sort of company that may have done something wrong, it's out. They don't have to pay you the rest of the time. You can't recoup further profits. If you lose money, you lose money. Something that happens more frequently is the government will change the scope of the contract. So the government asks for 1,000 phones. All of a sudden they get, you know, 500 phones. It's like, wow, we really need more. We don't want to rebid it. So, hey, can you give us 500 more phones? You have to say yes to the government. You don't ever say no to your contracting officer. So, you know, most of the time when that happens, they'll give you an equitable adjustment. They'll give you more dollars for your work. That gets tricky. If you're running a research contract, all of a sudden you have to pay people more time, more labor dollars to, you know, complete an analysis, to complete a research project or something like that. And as, you know, again, as you guys know, labor is one of the biggest categories and one of the biggest expenses in any business. And, you know, with most contracts, if you violate a contract, it's not only a monetary thing, it can be a criminal thing. It all depends where you commit an error, if you will. You know, it's one thing to lie on an invoice, it's another thing to lie on a report. If you submit fraudulent data, if you tell the government you're doing something and all of a sudden you're not, if you're using a contractor that you're not supposed to, if you talk to someone you're not supposed to, if you, I don't want to use the word bribe, but if you improperly provide hospitality to certain individuals who are, you know, deemed, you know, important for your contract. These are all things that can get you in trouble with the federal government. It's one thing, you know, it's all listed in the FAR. And I really employ people, if you want to do business with the federal government, you know, there's books, how to do business with the feds 101, really read into it. There's a lot of ins and outs. You know, we saw some of it with the current administration where commercial executives come into the federal land and they don't realize you can't use a plane to go somewhere. You can't, you know, you can't check a car out to go do something like you can in a commercial company. There's more people doing audits, and we got to make sure that it's fair for everybody. Items to bring to mind, labor regulations. One thing that the government does regulate is how much you can and can't pay individuals of a certain labor category. This is actually the base of our pricing model. because one of the things that people, one of the most troublesome areas is how much do you pay people, right? The old line, the old line is you're going to say you're going to pay a guy, $12 an hour to do a job and they're going to get it done and you're still making money. Well, turns out once you win the contract, you got to pay that person $15 an hour. Now, all of a sudden your profit's out the door. That's not always the case, but the government has set aside, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has set aside probably close to, I want to say like 300 to 400 labor categories, probably even more, of how much you should be paying certain individuals. Everything from custodial staff to chief executives to research and development folks, analysts, everything that engineers, mechanical engineers, anything you can think of, there's a labor category. And there's a minimum and a maximum that you must pay those folks. Obviously, each one of those, categories has, junior, senior, level 1, level 2, level 3, and all that's broken out. And why I say that's the bulk of our pricing model is because some of the contracts that we're doing, for example, are some NASA contracts. So there's, research scientists that have 2 or 3 doctorate degrees. Well, they have to get paid more than the guy who holds the fuel gauge. But the fuel gauge guy, he gets paid pretty well. Another thing I really like to bring up is allowable versus unallowable. So there's costs that the government will cover and there's costs that they won't cover. You can always submit a justification, you can always submit an appeal, but they do draw some hard lines. So some of the things that they allow is time and materials costs, labor relations, and bonding costs. These are some things that the government will cover. Some of the things that I always harp on with my clients about what they won't cover alcohol. Under any circumstance, if you submit a receipt to the government with alcohol on it, they're going to disavow the entire receipt. All of a sudden, you're picking up a dinner tab. Contributions and donations. And that's anything from a political donation to a nonprofit, nonpartisan donation. You got to draw the line somewhere, and that's one of the things that you'll find with government contracting is they've drawn a few lines in the sand, and the lines in the sand really represent that we're not going to consider anything because you don't know. You can hide a lot of things under contributions and donations, and they want to make sure that they're not reimbursing you for that. Entertainment as well. If you take clients out and you go do, you have a dinner, you go to a theater, you go to a show or something like that, that's not going to be covered. It's one thing to, host a dinner or host an event at your office, bring in lunch, bring in pizzas for your clients or your subcontractors. That's one thing. But how does the government know that if you're going to a concert with some clients that you're not improperly entertaining certain clients that you shouldn't be? So another thing that you need is you need a deemed adequate accounting system. What does that mean? That means that you passed a DCAA pre-award accounting system review. The DCAA is the Defense Contracting Audit Association. Bring that up because they audit all government contracts based on the DFAR. And they do that for a reason, because the DFAR is more complicated. So if you can pass the DFAR, then you can pass the FAR. I know that sounds kind of backwards, but most of the time, if you're working like a USAID or an NIH contract, they're not going to hold you to all the standards of the DFAR because they won't apply. So, but there are some, contractors where you have multiple contracts with multiple agencies. You got to make sure that you're really, being copacetic with all of them. So the 4 major parts of a deemed adequate accounting system are software, training, policies, and controls. Software means you have to have an actual accounting software. QuickBooks, Uninet, Deltek. You have to have something that's going to be approved by the government. It sounds simple, but you'd be amazed how many people are just using, a cash register and Excel, and they're tracking accounts receivable and payable. Written policies and procedures. This is where a lot of people get in trouble because some of the FAR has clauses in it that say we're going to allow whatever the company allows. Well, if the company doesn't have a written policy or a written documented procedure, then it can't protect itself. And, a lot of smaller companies don't have a policy and procedures manual. You can purchase them online. That's something that we can help you out with. But it's always a good idea just to have something written down in case someone comes along like, hey, this is how we do business. Training. You have to provide documented training to your accounting and pricing folks. That means that you have to regularly either go out and get training for them or provide training classes. You don't have to do it all the time. You can do it as infrequently as once a year or every 6 months, but you have to attempt to always keep your people up to date on the current rules, regulations, and that sort of thing. And then internal controls. That means you got to have more than one person looking at your books. You got to have more than one person in your accounting department overseeing everything. You know, if one of the areas where people get in trouble is that they only have one person in accounting or a pricing department. And if one, you know, as you guys know, if only one person is in charge, there's bound to be errors, there's bound to be oversight, and there's bound to be something in there that's going to be a cause for concern later down, later down the road. And one of the funny things about a deemed adequate system is that a system cannot be deemed adequate until it is audited, and you can't request an audit. So you have to build the system, set it up to the best of your to the best of your knowledge, and wait for an audit to come. There's always, there's two types of government contractors: those who have been audited and those who will be audited. So you just got to make sure that you have all the policies and procedures in place. So, that's where where the McKelvey Group comes in. Some of these are underlined. I have hyperlinks in here. I don't know if we're going to pass this out at the end, but I wanted to make sure that I had something in there for people to click on. So one of the things that we provide is a system called GovAct. GovAct is a deemed adequate accounting system where we install an entire accounting department in your firm. If you're an existing company, we can come in and modify yours to fit all the requirements here. If you have no accounting system, we put this one in. One of the reasons that we really push this product is because we have constructed it and standardized it on a fixed fee price. The reason that it's a fixed fee is because you're going to do it how we set it up. We're going to host and maintain your accounting software. We're going to help coordinate your semi-monthly payroll. And we have standardized the chart of accounts, allocations, your monthly reports, your policies and procedures, and your indirect rate structure. Why that's so important is that's where the bulk of our time and our resources would go. Say your chart of accounts is wishy-washy. Say you have old stuff on there. We've built a chart of accounts to incorporate almost every facet of government contracting. It's got, I would say, over 200 lines in it. Most companies don't use them all, but you got to have it there just in case. Policies and procedures. We wrote policies and procedures on how to use QuickBooks, how to use Deltek, how to use the chart of accounts. And and that's one of the things that we're really pushing right now. It's something that we're kind of giving a discount on. So if you are interested in government contracting, that's something we should be talking about. And another major portion of our business is audit support. So like I said, I made my joke about audits, but I am being serious. Everyone does get audited. And there's two ways to kind of go about it. When the government shows up, they give you a list of everything they're looking for. It could be everything from time cards to invoices to a receipt for gas. And you need to have the justifications for each one of those items. I've been through audits before. I was telling Ron earlier today, I worked through an audit where we had speakers at a conference. And when I was looking at the receipts for each one of these speakers that we paid, the only thing was there was their name and the date and where they spoke. Not what they spoke about, who they spoke to, what room they were in. There was no justification. And that company got in a lot of trouble. One of my other favorite jokes is that the government's never going to shut you down. They're just going to fine you all the dollars in your bank account. So that's so that's one thing to keep in mind. We also provide training, how to respond to an RFP, how to price a proposal. Each proposal has multiple things. One of our bread and butter is the cost volume. And then RFP response, cost volume response, and narrative support. A lot of people don't know that a good hunk of the proposal is just the written word. It's really not the dollars. It's the justification. It's the resumes. It's who's going to do the work, who's bid critical on it. And each agency is a little different. Each proposal is a little different. You got to make sure that you're responding in the right way. That's government contracting 101. We could get into more detail, but I think that's a good oversight of kind of, what you need to be aware of if you're ready to kind of take that step. Any questions, concerns, thoughts?
I've got one. So Josh, I have, with my company, when I first moved to this area, I knew nothing about government contracting, and I started looking at marketing agencies in the area, which ones were successful. And I saw a pattern of government contracting work. Mm-hmm. So I thought, you know what, this is something I really have to look into. So I did the due diligence of getting myself completely set up in SAM with mm-hmm. SWAM. I was working in a building that was in a hub zone, so I was looking into that qualification. And then I also learned that it's really kind of a tricky process to get your first government contract. It's really much better I know you didn't, I don't think you talked about that piece, but it's much better to go in as a sub to start with, to get yourself some of that experience, so then that the government agencies know about you. I even went to some matchmaker events in DC. Got nothing.
Yeah.
Never gotten anything. And I know you did talk about that, but I found that it was a ton of work.
Yep.
And it led to absolutely nothing. And I found that it was much easier to work with commercial companies where you didn't have to go through all of that to compete and to get down. And twice we were down to being one of the 2 companies in the room and didn't get the work. So I guess my question is it worth it?
For some people, it's not. If you have, if you found a good niche in the industry or the business that you're in, it might not be worth it. Because like you said, there's a lot of competition. Everyone's bidding lower than the next person. And, for someone who's, a 1 or 2 person shop, you can manipulate your rates and what you're paying yourself, to bid lower. And it really all depends what type of what type of company you are. If you're a sole proprietorship, if you're an LLC, if you're incorporated, kind of what you pay yourself, if you pay yourself a salary or if you don't. That's one of the advantages of being an LLC. You don't necessarily have to pay yourself. So you can just bid yourself at a lower rate and then take the profits at the end of the year. It really all depends. The other thing is the service that you're providing. Some services are more, some services are more sought after. Some are more competitive. Obviously, being, a women-owned business in a hub zone, that's a good start. But like you said, being a subcontractor is the way to go. It's too hard to get a prime. You really just need one. And as soon as you get one, then you'll get your CPARs. The CPARs is how they rate you on your performance. People generally get a good CPARs, unless you do something really bad. You cross someone, you say something dumb, you say, you do something you shouldn't have done. But like you said, getting that first one's definitely tough.
How about the whole idea of the incumbent? A lot of times I think some of these RFPs go out and they're not real ones. They already know who they want to use.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going around. I was talking to Ron earlier. He knows about it. There's, the government finds people that they like to work with, and they find a good bidder, and they just continuing to bid it out there. To shake the incumbent, you really got to bid lower. And for some of these contracts that have been around for a long time, and they've had the same contracting officer, so the same people have been reading these proposals every 4 years that are going out. And if someone comes in too low, they know that's not possible. They know that there's going to be issues. And a lot of times they might go with the lower person, but they know it's like, hey, if there's going to be too much headache, or they're going to come back and ask for more money in this way, but it's one of those things where you got to get in with a prime who's willing to work with different subs to provide different things.
Another thing I want to add to your comment, Elisa, is that also I have noticed that if you have contacts in government agencies, it's much easier to get connected to the right person to get that first contract. Mm-hmm. It's really hard when you're starting from zero, no connections, and all those matchmakings are tough because there's a lot of competition. But if you have contacts at particular agencies, even if it's not directly the contracting officer or the program manager, but they can connect you with the right person, that will be very helpful.
Right.
You got to have a good BD individual, a good capture individual, people who know people around town. They don't award contracts based on being friends, but if you're close and you have a good relationship with that contracting officer, or someone in that agency, they'll help you out. They'll figure out how to help you either be prime or get on as one of the subs. It's one of the things about government contracting where it is a merit-based system, but those relationships are invaluable. And it's hard to sometimes, pick those two apart, and sometimes it doesn't make sense, right? How can merit and relationships be separated? And they are, but there's a blended line, and you got to know people. Like Patricia said, knowing the right people is the most valuable thing in this town.
Josh, can you please stop sharing your screen so we can get back to our windows? All right, very good.
Hey Josh, if we find ourselves in conversation with someone who's in a business in this space, what are buzzwords, phrases, things that we should be keeping an ear out for to trigger and go, oh, you should probably have a conversation with Josh?
If they're looking to expand their business here, with the federal government, if you think that they have a service that the public may need, the government needs to provide that service. If you have a widget or even something as like pencils, if you find a guy who's selling pencils left and right, he should be trying to sell them to the federal government, because you never know what the government's going to need. They put out contracts for everything. So anyone that's looking to really expand, in that federal arena here in the DC area, if they've gotten tired of the commercial market, if they're ready for more of a challenge, like Elisa said, it's tough, but there are people out there that love it. They love to fail. They love to struggle. And if you're looking for someone who wants to get in there, or they're, strategically opening up businesses in hub zones or SBA zones, or they're, a serial entrepreneur who's always looking for something new, they could be interested in doing business with the government.
Also, there are a lot of programs for innovation. So entrepreneurs that they have something really new, especially in technology. I think those are really good to tap on, because the government agencies have a specific programs to test it, to be the first to try it, and to help develop it.
All right, I want to everybody give Josh Beebe a little round of applause. Thank you very much. Awesome.
A round of applause, but thank you.
All right.